Sudden money does not make you rich, it makes you visible. That is the first thing most people get wrong, and getting it wrong is how they lose everything. A man thinks the windfall made him free. It did not. It made him a target. A woman thinks the inheritance made life simple. It did not. It made every weakness in her character more expensive. A family thinks the jackpot solved their future. It did not. It turned their front gate into a crowd problem. That is why I do not think of sudden wealth as a blessing first. I think of it as a fortress. And if you inherit a fortress before you learn how to guard one, the walls do not protect you. They trap you with a treasury inside while everybody outside, and some people inside, start calculating how to get a piece of it. This is the adult truth about a sudden fortune. You are not mainly receiving money. You are receiving pressure, social pressure, emotional pressure, identity pressure, family pressure, temptation pressure, status pressure, legal pressure. But money simply gives all of those forces more surface area to hit. That is why so many people who get rich all at once end up broke a few years later. They do not lose the fortress because it was too small. They lose it because they celebrate before they secure the gates. And I want to say this brutally because polite language has already ruined enough people. The first danger after a windfall is not bad investing. It is bad psychology. A poor man with no fortress can still dream like a poor man because the consequences of fantasy are limited by the size of his purse. But a poor mind inside a full fortress becomes a weapon against itself. Every old insecurity gets money attached to it. Every old resentment wants to perform. Every old hunger wants a costume. Every old fantasy suddenly wants to become architecture. That is why a fortune reveals character faster than poverty does. Poverty constrains your mistakes. Money scales them. So if you want to keep a sudden fortune, you must stop behaving like someone who just got lucky and start behaving like a steward who just inherited a border in hostile territory. The first rule of a fortress is silence. Do not ring the bell. Do not run into the square shouting that you are finally free. Do not tell cousins, classmates, former enemies, old flames, new acquaintances, or half-trusted friends. Do not post. Do not hint. Do not buy a dramatic visible symbol so quickly that the whole town does your announcing for you. Privacy is not paranoia. Privacy is wall building. Ordinary people think money becomes dangerous when it runs low. Wrong. Money first becomes dangerous when too many people know where it is. The instant the world learns that your gates are full, the map changes. People you have not heard from in years suddenly rediscover emotional vocabulary. Every struggling entrepreneur becomes a visionary. Every relative becomes a historian of family fairness. Every manipulator becomes a wounded innocent. Every fool with an app idea becomes a founder. Every person who resented you before will either come closer to extract or move farther away to punish. Money does not only attract opportunity, it attracts interpretation. And once people start interpreting your money, you no longer control the story. That is why your first move is not generosity, not celebration, not reinvention. It is concealment. You are not hiding because wealth is shameful. You are hiding because walls are easier to defend when the crowd does not know which stones matter. The second rule is even less glamorous, and it is the first real act of sovereignty. Kill the debt, not some of it. All of the useless debt, every high-interest consumer balance is an open gate. Every monthly obligation tied to old purchases is a servant of the old life trying to drag the new fortress back into the habits that made you weak in the first place. Credit cards, personal loans, expensive card debt. Ugly interest bearing stupidity from an earlier chapter, pay it off and stop there. Notice what I just said, stop there. Because many people do one intelligent thing with sudden money and then assume intelligence will now happen automatically. They pay off the debt, feel clean for the first time in years, and then immediately start signing new obligations because abundance made them feel immune to arithmetic. That is how they turn one cleared gate into 3 new ones. Debt is not merely a balance sheet issue after a windfall. It is a signal issue. If you cannot bring yourself to live debt light after a sudden fortune, then the problem was never scarcity. The problem was appetite. And appetite armed with a windfall is one of the fastest routes to self-destruction, But now we come to a rule most people hate because it feels emotionally unfair. Do not quit your job yet. This offends the fantasy. A man wants to tell his boss exactly what he thinks. A woman wants to walk out of the office and never hear another fake meeting voice again. I understand that impulse. It is human. It is also usually stupid. The day after a windfall is not the day to burn your schedule. You keep the routine because routine is a stabilizer. Work is not only a paycheck, it is structure, it is social rhythm. It is identity ballast, it is protection against turning your whole life into an empty, expensive afternoon. Most people are not wired to become nobility overnight, without structure. They start shopping, drifting, experimenting, signaling, numbing themselves, and performing freedom before they have actually learned what freedom requires. That is why telling your boss to go to hell feels powerful for 1 hour and expensive for 5 years. When money arrives suddenly, the real shift is not that you should stop working. The real shift is that you no longer have to kneel. That is different. The power is not in leaving immediately. The power is in knowing you could. That knowledge changes your posture far more usefully than a dramatic exit ever will. You go to work differently. You negotiate differently. You tolerate less nonsense. You become calmer because the whip has lost some of its reach. That is already a major gain. Do not waste it by turning your life into a theater production while your mind is still adjusting to the existence of the fortress. And that brings me to the fourth rule. Lock the treasury and let it sit. Nothing in modern life is harder for an undisciplined person than temporary abundance. A starving man who stumbles into a grain vault does not first think of planting. He thinks of eating. That is what most sudden winners do. They look at the money and think every desire is now a task to complete. House, cars, clothes, travel, revenge upgrades, status repairs, childhood fantasies, family rescues, life redesign. They do not understand that the first 6 months after the money arrives are not for action, they are for decompression. You do not mainly need time to decide what to buy. You need time for the old version of you to lose voting rights. That takes longer than people think, for months. Your mind will keep making plans that feel right in the morning and foolish at night. 1 week you will want to move. The next week you will want to hide. 1 month you will want to create a business empire. The next month you will want to escape to somewhere sunny and do nothing for 10 years. Good. Let those moods reveal themselves. That is precisely why you do not touch the principle impulsively. A fortune is like a loaded fortress cannon. The first person who should not be allowed to fire it casually is the captain still trembling from the surprise of inheriting the fort. Let the money sit. Let the temperature fall. Let the fantasy spend itself in private thought instead of public action. That 6-month stillness is not delay. It is quarantine. You are not protecting the money from the world only. You are protecting it from the first emotional version of yourself that meets it. Then comes the rule that offends pride the most. Learn before you move. The average person who receives a large sudden fortune did not build the machinery that creates, protects, allocates, and compounds that level of wealth. There is no shame in that. The shame is pretending otherwise. A fool with money is not impressive. He is an event, and events do not last. So the first serious investment after a windfall is not a stock. It is literacy. You need to become the kind of person who understands what money does, where it leaks, how taxes bite, how capital compounds, how predators present themselves, how risk hides inside fine language, how illiquidity traps, how fees skin, how inflation quietly steals, how trusts function, how good advisors think, how bad advisors smile, how portfolio structure matters, how to tell the difference between yield and safety, how to tell the difference between business ownership and a fantasy about business ownership. If you do not do this, you remain a civilian living inside a fortress built by someone else. And civilians are easy to manipulate. That is why I distrust the person who wants to spend before he wants to understand. He is telling you he wants the symbolism of wealth, not the stewardship of wealth. Those are opposite desires. Now let us talk about advisors, because this is where people make expensive moral mistakes. If the money came through family wealth and the relative who built or preserved, it had a serious advisor with a proven history. You do not toss that relationship aside because sudden independence made you emotionally itchy. A person who helps shepherd a real fortune into existence or preservation may know more about your family's structure than your ego does. Familiarize yourself with the machinery before you replace the engineers. I am not saying every old advisor is sacred. I am saying abrupt replacement is often just the new captain's way of announcing himself. That impulse is costly. People inherit serious money, feel a sudden need to prove adulthood, and move the assets to someone slicker, louder, cheaper, or more flattering. Then they discover that charm is not competence and access is not stewardship. Good advisors are not cheap because cheap advice tends to be the most expensive advice you ever follow. Respect the proof already embedded in the fortress, then evaluate rationally. That is how adults behave. Now let us get to the most seductive trap of all. Looking rich. This is where athletes, entertainers, lottery winners, and newly wealthy families so often begin digging graves under polished driveways. They think the correct response to a larger fortress is to put on a crown, bigger house, rich neighborhood, more cars than sense, gifts to every relative, luxury clocks in every room. A life remodeled so fast that the recurring costs become their own private army of invaders. I want you to hear this as clearly as possible. Do not become rich. Rich, become comfortable. There is a world of difference. Comfort means the debt is gone. The house may be paid down or paid off. The bills are easy. The pressure is low. The family breathes. The base life is stable. The schedule is humane. And the fortress is easier to defend. Rich means you buy the neighborhood, the taxes, the maintenance crew, the image obligations, the comparative insecurity, the social theater, the recurring costs, and the new baseline that silently requires the fortress to keep feeding itself faster than it should. That is not freedom. That is costume debt. A large fancy house is not only a purchase, it is a recurring agreement with gravity, property taxes, repairs, insurance, landscaping, expectations, social comparison, opportunistic spending to match the environment. Athletes learn this too late. So do heirs. The house that was supposed to symbolize arrival quietly becomes a second payroll. And when the fortune begins to thin, the lifestyle does not retreat politely. It holds its entitlement like a blade at your throat. That is why the right early use of sudden money is simplification, not spectacle. Fix the life. Do not theatrically redesign it. And once the world realizes you have money, another siege begins, requests. Never forget this. People are far more comfortable risking your money than their own. The friend with a business idea, the cousin with a property scheme, the old acquaintance with the partnership of the century, the sibling with just a short-term loan, the parent with guilt, laced entitlement, the neighbor with a private deal, the dreamer with a deck, the struggler with a story. All of them will approach the gate in one form or another. Do not invest in your friend's business. Do not start lending casually. Do not confuse affection with due diligence. Do not confuse guilt with obligation. And above all, do not tear holes in your own safety net because somebody else learned there was fabric there. This is one of the hardest parts of sudden wealth because whatever you do will change relationships. If you say yes, you may lose the money and the relationship. If you say no, you may preserve the money and still injure the relationship. There is no perfect emotional outcome once other people know the fortress exists. That is why privacy mattered first. But after privacy fails, boundaries matter second. A fortress without a gate policy becomes a public park, and public parks do not stay rich for long. The same logic applies to starting a business immediately. This is the fantasy of the newly wealthy amateur. He has always suspected he could run something, own something, build something, command something. Now the money has arrived, and every half-formed dream suddenly wants payroll, office space, equipment, branding, staff, apps, and optimism. 9 out of 10 businesses fail. That is not an insult. That is the sea. You do not get one giant stroke of luck and then assume luck owes you a second act because you feel inspired. Inspiration is not a moat. Capital is not competence. Owning a checkbook is not the same as owning a machine that can survive customers, margins, hiring, taxes, demand, and time. Start small if you must. Run every serious move through real scrutiny. But do not confuse a windfall with entrepreneurial readiness. The same illusion that destroys lottery winners destroys heirs in a more sophisticated tone. I can finally do what I've always wanted. Fine. But if you have never built anything, never sold anything, never managed anyone, never survived a cash crunch, never understood unit economics, then the first fortune is not permission to become reckless. It is a chance to become educated without starving. Use it for that. Another thing people learn too late is that money paints a target. The richer you become, the more complex the world becomes around you. Scams get more sophisticated, lawsuits become more likely, emotional manipulation becomes more refined. Predators learn your vocabulary. Some will flatter you, some will shame you, some will cry, some will seduce, some will advise, some will accuse, some will love you, only in proportion to what the walls seem to contain. That is why sudden wealth is not only financial, it is forensic. You must begin evaluating motives with adult seriousness. And the first person whose motives you need to inspect is yourself. That is why health matters more than people think after a windfall. Money without health is a fortress with rotting beams. Now that the pressure of survival is reduced, your next job is not to indulge harder. It is to lengthen the years during which you can intelligently enjoy, manage, and protect the structure. Full medical checkup, better food, better sleep, better training, better mind, better habits. When you have money, self-neglect becomes harder to excuse because one of the last honest defenses is gone. I couldn't afford to do better. At this point, you often can. Do it. And now we arrive at the rule that separates temporary wealth from durable wealth. Do not spend the tree, live on the fruit. People who inherit or win large sums often think the number in the account is their new identity. It is not. It is a producing asset that must be treated like a living tree, not like a woodpile for one long winter. The principle is the tree. The annual sustainable distribution is the fruit. If you keep chopping branches to make every year feel like a parade, one day you wake up and realize there is no orchard left, only old receipts. The 5% rule in the source material is clumsy in how people usually hear it, but the spirit underneath it is very powerful. A large fortune only lasts if the principal is invested prudently enough to throw off a recurring stream that you can mostly live from without constantly attacking the core. Whether your specific sustainable percentage should be 5%, lower than 5%, or structured differently depends on taxes, portfolio construction, age, inflation, and temperament. Fine, but the deeper principle remains: do not treat capital like income. Treat capital like a machine or a tree, or, in my language tonight, the stone and steel of the fortress itself. You may consume what the fortress can sustainably produce. You do not set the walls on fire to stay warm one winter. That is what people do when they mistake sudden wealth for infinite wealth. And if you have children, the same principle becomes even more important. Protect your kids from the money. That sentence sounds cruel to sentimental people and wise to anyone who has watched unearned abundance rot an undeveloped character. Children should benefit from the fortress. They should not be allowed to raid it before they become adults, who can understand why it exists. That is how dynastic wealth gets built, through controlled access, trust, structures, allowances, stewardship rules, and delayed authority. The rich are not getting richer because they are morally superior. They are getting richer because they build gates around capital and around heirs. You do not give a teenager a siege treasury and hope maturity appears as a side effect. You structure the flow, you preserve the walls, you teach the philosophy before you hand over keys. This is stewardship, not stinginess. And while we are speaking about family, let us drag another trap into the light. Do not destroy your marriage because money made temptation easier. Money does not merely buy comfort. It buys access, vanity, options, attention, and the illusion that consequences have become optional. People who receive a fortune sometimes begin behaving as though ordinary commitments were written for poorer people. That is childish and catastrophically expensive. Infidelity in a newly rich life is not just immoral, it is a financial explosive. Half the fortress, child support, lawyers, bitterness, factional warfare inside the walls, generations poisoned. If you must make one simple rule, make it this. The money is supposed to strengthen the family system, not test how quickly you can betray it. We also need to say something most people refuse to say aloud: play it safe. The modern world sneers at safety because safety looks boring to people who secretly crave stories. But if you are already in the wildly fortunate position of receiving life-changing capital, why exactly are you trying to audition for an even more dramatic story? Why turn a miracle into a gamble? Why take shady deals? Why chase double or nothing schemes? Why attempt to prove genius when prudence could guarantee comfort, security, legacy, and peace for the rest of your life? This is where greed often masquerades as ambition. A person already saved by luck decides he must now prove worthiness by taking bigger risks. It is nonsense. You do not need to turn a blessing into a moonshot. You need to stop the blessing from becoming a curse. That is the adult task. Behave as though the windfall never changed your appetite. Only your solvency, that mindset, protects more people than brilliance ever will, because that is really what the successful, sudden rich person does. He does not become a different species. He becomes a calmer version of a disciplined adult. Debts disappear. The roof is secure. The future is no longer terrifying. The children are protected. The money is invested. The lifestyle is measured. The work continues until it is time to transition intelligently. The health improves. The requests are filtered. The walls are maintained. The tree is not chopped down. And then something wonderful happens. Life stops being a constant panic. That is what the fortress is for. Not domination, not theater, not revenge on old humiliations. Protection, choice, time, dignity. The ability to say no, the ability to say not yet, the ability to say enough. Most people who lose sudden wealth never learn that enough is the holiest word in the language of stewardship. Without enough, every gift becomes gasoline. So here's the choice I want to leave you with. You can treat the windfall like fireworks. Tell everyone, quit immediately. Upgrade violently, lend foolishly. Invest emotionally, start businesses you do not understand. Confuse principle for income. Expose your children early. Test your marriage. Perform importance. Burn the walls for warmth and applause. That path feels alive fast. It dies fast too. Or you can treat the windfall like a fortress. Close the gates. Silence the square. Kill the debt. Keep the routine. Let the treasury cool. Learn before you move. Respect proven guidance. Get comfortable, not theatrical. Refuse random hands at the gate. Protect your health. Live on the fruit, not the stone shield. Your children from easy ruin. Strengthen the family. Play defense like your grandchildren. Dignity depends on it. Because it very well might. Sudden money is not a crown. It is a test of whether you can become the kind of person a fortress deserves. Most cannot decide early which side of that sentence you plan to live on.